Yep.
Okay. Get to mute all.
Oh, I don't know if you.
Okay. Can you hear me? Hands up. Okay. And I'm not hearing. Is it sounding better without all the background noise? Good. Okay. Okay. Let's get started. I've better find our. I know Matt, you're on here somewhere. There you. Oh, you moved. I'm gonna unmute you, Matt. Before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping items. Normally when you have a meeting, you start out telling everybody where the bathrooms are. I'm hoping I don't have to tell any of you where your bathrooms are at home. If you need that help, we're all in trouble. And so hopefully that's taken care of. I put everybody on mute. The thought is you can unmute yourself if you want to say something, but then when you're moving past that point, mute your mic as well. And then down below, I don't even notice there's a chat there. If you want to do questions, please type them in there. You can ask questions later as well, but that way it's another way for us to get some feedback, some questions. Before we get started with Adam, real quick, the Keltner Book Corner we're starting to revise the book club. I know, Rick, you tried to do this for years, but with everybody kind of stranded at home, we're revising it. And the book that we selected is Joe Posnanski's The Soul of Baseball, A Road Trip Through Buck O'Neill's America. The Chicago chapter did a Zoom meeting with Bob Kendrick from the Negro League Baseball Museum, with fabulous. And he was talking so much about Buck O'Neill and the positive person he was that I believe very strongly that in this time, reading a book about Buck O'Neill with all the positivity this man has always had would be very beneficial. So you can pick it up from Amazon. I picked it up for just under $8. Hopefully you can find it elsewhere as well. So when you get a chance, send me an email if you're in on it. I think we got 4 or 5 people at this point already. So we're at that. But more important, we came here tonight because we have a special guest in Adam McCalvy. I learned something about Adam that I didn't put in here in the bio, and emails back and forth. He was an intern with the Madison Black Wolf. And when I lived in Madison, I went to just one ball game. And the ball game I went to was a game when Isla Borders was pitching and Steve Schmidt, who owns the Mallards, was playing. Well, Adam picked up Isla Borders at the airport. So there's a connection I would have never thought of. That proves this world
so close to meeting.
Yeah. It's a small world. So anyhow, Adam grew up in New Berlin. I think it's interesting having a beat writer from Milwaukee reporting for the Brewers, and went to UW-Madison's journalism school. And as he has on his bio here, the 4 Ron Dane years, a good time to be at that school. His first baseball experience was working in the front office of the now defunct Madison Black Wolf. They were the team that left about 2000, I think was their last season, when the Mallards came in the following year in 2001. Hard to believe, but the Mallards are celebrating their 20th season this year if they can get it up and running. After graduation, he was one of the original hires at MLB.com in February 2001 after the owners voted to centralize the internet operations, and he's covered the team ever since. So if we get this season up and running, it'll be your 20th season on the beat. Congratulations on that. And then more important, also something you can talk about tonight, he has his first book coming out May 19th called The Milwaukee Brewers at 50. I've seen pictures of it out on Amazon. So welcome, Adam.
Thank you, guys. It's great. It's great to see you, especially the guys I know from the ballpark, Rick and Bob and Larry and probably a couple others.
Yeah.
Great to see everybody.
Yeah, good. I'd like to start out the question with the meeting by asking you a question just to get to know you a little better. And I'm stealing this from the SABRcast, where all the guests are always asked this question. I think it's a great question. What is your earliest baseball memory?
You know, during the shutdown, I've seen there's been some questions that have gone viral. Who signed the inside of your first ball glove? You know, your first favorite player, things like that. The one I wish I had an answer to was, what was the first game you went to? Because I have no idea. And I asked my mom as we've been starting to do some like promotion stuff for the book, like we went to tons of games at County Stadium as kids. And I asked for some memories of like our first game or pictures. And we have like 0 pictures at the ballpark from when I was a kid. So I have no idea what my first game was. I'll tell you my earliest memory of really falling in love with baseball was the 87 team. I was 9, and I have, like everyone, I'm sure, like crystal clear memories of parts of that season, Easter Sunday itself, and the Molitor hitting streak. I feel like it ended during State Fair. Maybe I'm wrong, but that's the way my memory goes. Being at State Fair, crowded around a radio. Maybe it was during the streak, but being crowded around the WTMJ booth listening to that. So those are, some of the earliest memories I have. I feel like it was about 87 when I really fell in love with the game of baseball and just started collecting cards and following the stats and really decided that this is something I wanted to do for a living. And it's crazy. All these years later, I'm lucky enough to do it.
Wow, that's neat. Did you have a favorite ball player?
I said this in something I wrote the other day, like for my era, maybe others agree, like you were Yount or Molitor. And I think it would be like really interesting for somebody to write a book about how you pick, like to me, like the kids around the neighborhood, it was very like, you could almost make teams based on the Yount kids and the Molitor kids. And I don't exactly know what drew me to Paul Molitor, but he was always my favorite player as a kid. Something about, he was always on base. He was always in the middle of everything, injuries or not. But he was just always seemed to play a part in the game. So I think Molitor was my favorite player. And then my favorite non-Brewer was Will Clark. And maybe that was from playing first base as a kid, just that swing, the beautiful swing, and the Giants were pretty good. But for some reason, I always really liked Will Clark. There was a kid down the street who gave me my first baseball cards. I don't know, maybe he just dumped off the cards that he didn't want. Like his mom told him to clean up the basement, and he found this kid that he could just get rid of all this junk. And his cards happened to be San Francisco Giants, Toronto Blue Jays, and St. Louis Cardinals. So as a kid, those were kind of the teams that I followed. And the Cardinals part drove my dad crazy because it was 82 is still pretty raw. But the other teams, it's so strange. All these years later, I still find myself like liking the Giants and Blue Jays. And I have no ties to those other than just having a bunch of baseball cards from those teams. So those are my favorites.
Well, Adam, I think many of us believe that it's basically between the ages of 9 and 12 is when you develop your baseball love, and a lot of that continues on here. I noticed my son is on here, and he hates the Cardinals probably for the same reason your dad does. So, yeah.
Yeah, my dad's not even that big of a baseball guy. I mean, he liked it because I liked it, and he was out in the backyard with me for hours and hours every night. But even he hates the Cardinals, and he just hates poor Bruce Sutter. Is just hated in the McCalvy household. And all these years later, I still think my dad hates him.
Cool. You got into working for the Brewers. How did that come about? Can you talk a little about how they hired you or how you got hired for this spot? Coming out of college, you were pretty raw.
Yeah, it was definitely I'm a big believer in kind of right place, right time, especially for in this industry. There are so many smart people who want to work in the game of baseball, and it is so hard to break in. And for some of them, it's raw talent and brilliance that gets them to that position. That's definitely not it for me. It is very much just being in the right position. You mentioned I worked for the Madison Black Wolf. I had applied for an internship with the Brewers, and it was my going into my junior year of college, and I was rejected because I didn't have enough experience. Now remember, I actually the other day, just one of these quarantine things, going through the file cabinet and clearing out, 10 years of financial records that I don't need. One of the things I found was all these rejection letters I got from baseball teams coming out of college. And one of them in college was from the Brewers. A woman named Liz Gersh from the Brewers PR department rejected me for an internship. And it really motivated me to go back and get a lot more experience writing at the paper, both when I was in Madison, I was lucky enough to have 2 student newspapers to write for, and got a lot more experience. Worked for the Black Wolf for a couple of seasons. I interned for the Milwaukee Bucks under Sherry Hansen, a fantastic PR director of the Bucks. Got experience there. The year they went to the Eastern Conference Finals. And then it was during that season that I got hired by MLB.com when the owners had voted to centralize their internet operation. And then later it kind of became a news organization. And they basically hired 2 warm bodies in every major league city. And it happened in the span of like 2 weeks. They hired 60 people around the game. And I just happened to be very, very lucky to be just coming out of college, have had some experience with the Brewers, got a recommendation from a member of their public relations department. And the funniest thing was the guy who hired me and who I worked with the first season or 2 was a guy named Brad Gersh, whose wife was Liz Gersh, who had turned me down for that internship a couple of years earlier. Brad worked in the Brewers ticket office and then moved over to do their website when this newfangled thing called the internet was starting. So he's who I interviewed with and got the job. And, you know, I was a broke college graduate, and Brad and Liz ended up kind of being my surrogate parents for the first couple of months of the job. And I got some good home cooked meals and got to know them really well. So I'm very much indebted to them. And Brad's brother is Michael Gersh of the Cardinals GM. So, you know, all right place, right time. Very, very. And then, you know, the first couple of seasons, I just kind of faked it. And here we are 20 years later.
Good. What don't you like about your job? From a superficial point of view, working second shift basically is a challenge. And, you know, it's different than other people, especially in the summer. The game is different. I don't know that I would say that's something I don't like, but it's something you find yourself kind of looking through box scores, even from not that long ago, 2008, and you see some of the nature of the games then and the time of game. And it was a different game. And I think that it's a challenge sometimes to not fall into the trap that I think some sports writers do, which is complaining about the game of baseball. I think it's fine to talk about the changes, but banging your head against that wall, I don't find particularly helpful. But that can be a challenge sometime. And then, look, I mean, there's instances where you run into challenging personalities, and that can be a real drag when you're trying to do the job and everybody's exhausted and working all these, crazy schedules, and you run into kind of a jerk, and it can make life rather miserable. But, you know, those stories can have silver linings sometimes too. Sometimes the fights that you have on the job can end up being a good thing in the long run. Yeah.
So that's the sort of short list of things that I don't like about this job. It's a very short list because most of it is, I find myself very fortunate to be in the position.
We like stories. We've always liked when people come on, they have stories that could, and sometimes we really like names, but sometimes it's not possible to give names. If you had to talk about, 20 years of dealing with major league ball players and coaches and managers, I'm sure you've found some people that are absolute gems, and that, you just talking to them makes your day. And there's probably others that if your boss says go talk to them, you're going to call in sick.
Johnny Estrada's of the world, you're trying to say there?
Well, yeah, I don't know most of them, but yeah. So are there players like that?
Yes, there are players that are very challenging to be around. You know, Johnny Estrada was not fun. He's the only player who ever told me on the record to fuck off, which was a very unique and enjoyable experience. Matt Garza was incredibly difficult to deal with and no fun at all to deal with, and just kind of not a very happy person. But I would say that stories like that are they are at a bare minimum. And most of the people in the game are, delightful people. And the thing that's maybe a little unique to the game of baseball, maybe I'm biased because it's the sport I love the most, but to me, one of the things that's unique about baseball is how hard it is to get to the major leagues. when you're a professional. Like you can be a professional in baseball and go absolutely nowhere. I don't think if you get that far to become a professional in the NBA or in the NFL, it's as difficult to take that next step and get to the big leagues. And I think that the fact that so many of these guys, even the really great players, have to grind year after year is one of those kind of special things about baseball. And I think it means that the game is populated by kind of a different character of men. And almost everybody has really some fascinating stories about really being at low periods. Even the best players go through that in this sport, and it changes them a little bit. And look, I haven't spent much time in the NBA. I've spent no time in the NFL, so I'm obviously biased, and maybe others have a perspective that's a fuller than mine. But to me, that's just one of the kind of the special things about baseball, and most, I would say most of the people are really great to deal with. I said there's examples of where a bad situation can turn into something good. The best example of that for me is Mike Dejan, who was a pitcher way back when for the Brewers. His life actually got very complicated after when he went to Colorado. He ended up losing everything. His wife left him and took everything, but that's a separate story. But in 2002, I think it was, maybe it was 2001 right away in spring training, when it might have been 2001 when Curtis Askanik was supposed to be the Brewers closer and got hurt. Then Chad Fox, who is on a very short list of the players I would have loved to see healthy for a long time because he had so many weapons and could have been so good. The slider was amazing. But anyway, he was going to be the closer then. And somewhere along the line in spring training, he got hurt. So Dejan was kind of next in line. So we did a story on MLB.com about here's the plan for filling these injuries. And the headline that they put on it was Dejan is Brewers de facto closer. And the next morning I show up at Maryvale in the little old clubhouse there, and I hear from someone, Dejan wants to talk to you, which is like the sentence you never want to hear, because X wants to talk to you means, X wants to scream at you for a couple of minutes. And that's what he did. He didn't like the word de facto. He thought it was insulting to, the work he had done. He'd been in the big leagues. He'd closed games in the minor leagues. He had a track record, and he felt like it was, an insult to that track record that we said de facto. So we talked it out, and life goes on. So he actually had an okay year that year. That was the season that he screamed at Jerry Royster on the mound in Houston and wouldn't let Jerry Royster take him out of the game. But if you look at Dejan's numbers that year, he actually did okay. And the next spring, back in the clubhouse, and he waves me over to his locker, and I go, okay, what is this going to be? And he pulls out a little date book and hands me a photograph. And it's a 4x6 of this cherry, beautiful black pickup truck, shiny, brand new. And I was like, it's great. I have no idea why you're showing this to me. And he just says, look a little closer. And I look closer, and the license plate says de facto. And he said that he got just pissed off about everybody doubting that he could do this job. And he went out and had a good year, made 50 grand or whatever it was in incentives, and spent $50,000 on a brand new truck. So that one had a happy ending. And there's other stories like that where you battle with a guy for a long time, and then in the end it turns out to be it all kind of comes out in the end.
You've been doing this for 20 years, and you said things have changed. I agree with you since 2008. The three outcomes are all we see. But nothing has been quite like this baseball season. And take us back to spring training when all this started happening, and what's been going on since.
Well, I find myself thinking back to the couple of weeks we were in Phoenix and asking myself, what were we thinking? Why didn't anybody see this coming? Maybe that's the question we're all asking ourselves now. But we were completely narrow-mindedly focused on the season ahead. There were clues. One of the early days before the game started, there's a little workroom now in the renovated Maryvale where when we're not using the press box, we sit and write. And I was in there, and I was the last one there. And Roger Kaplinger, the Brewers medical director, one day just poked his head in had a pink Post-it note, slapped it on the wall by the door, and left. And the next day there was a hand sanitizer unit there. That should have been clue number one, that they were thinking about this. And then a couple of days after that, one of the student journalists from ASU, they have a program at ASU, a good journalism program, and students come out, the Brewers credential them and let them do, there's writers, there's broadcast people. And one of the kids who was doing broadcast, he asked Craig Counsell a question about coronavirus. And Counsell said that they actually had a meeting that day, like a conference call with Major League Baseball, to talk about kind of preparations or different scenarios. And even then, it just didn't register as like something to be thinking about. And I mean, I'd have to go back and look when that was, but if it wasn't in March, it was somewhat late in February. And I just think, we were also narrow-mindedly focused on the day-to-day, that when things did shut down, it happened so quickly and so abruptly that it was jarring for everybody because it had not been a topic of conversation in the clubhouse. So it all happened, and if you think about it, in the span of like 4 days. It was a Monday that Major League Baseball decided to close the clubhouse to reporters, and teams scrambled to set up alternate press arrangements. For the Brewers, that was this storeroom where they slapped a table and some chairs, and we sat there amid weird stuff like a bike with a Jolice Chassine's name tagged on it, and buckets of gum and seeds and all the other stuff that they had ready for the games. And that was a Monday. And then it was on Wednesday that the NBA suspended its operation, and that the president gave an office address, and that Tom Hanks and Reed Wilson announced they had COVID-19. And then it was the next day that baseball was paused. So it happened like really, really quickly in the span of like 72 hours. The baseball world changed. And here we are all these weeks later with really, I don't have any information better than any of you do about when it's going to start. I read like you guys do about the ideas being kicked around. I think those are just the tip of the iceberg in terms of the scenarios that they're working out, because there's so much money at stake and so many people.
Now, almost 49,000 people.
They have to work through probably a dozen, I don't know, more scenarios how this thing could play out. And I just think there are so many unanswered questions right now about testing and everybody's safety. I don't think there's it's not easy to answer what baseball's going to look like when it comes back and when it's going to come back, because I really think all the way up to the commissioner just cannot answer that question.
New York and New Jersey. New York has recorded 15,000.
Is anybody else hearing that video that I'm hearing?
5,063.
What the hell is it?
New Jersey, the death totals per state declined dramatically. You don't necessarily expect that to happen.
Whoever owner is needs to be muted.
Yeah, I don't know who owner is. I was looking at that too. I just muted everybody again. Adam, you probably have to unmute yourself, or I can probably unmute you too.
There we go.
Yeah, okay. Okay. Anybody else questions? I'm not seeing, is there anything out here? Anybody have a question or a lot of questions?
Adam, I have a question. I know that your book's coming out soon in May.
Yeah.
And I like to get a lot of books actually from Kindle because it's cheaper.
Yep.
I get the impression that this book, and correct me if I'm wrong, would be better hardcover because of the photographs.
Well, it is. There is a Kindle version. It is, though. It's a big. If anyone got the Packers book that they did for the 100th anniversary, Tom Andrews did a Packers book with the Beaver brothers. It's the same format as that book. So they sent me like this, which is what it is, except it's like a tiny little thin brochure version of it. But it's like a book like this that's 256 pages long. And it has, here's a good, made sure to get Euchre in there in the short shorts with Vuk. So it's, there's kind of portraits and photographs from, it's meant to be a keepsake book. I've learned, this is the first time I've done a book, so I've learned that they call it a keepsake book or there's another term for it that someone can tell me, but so I mean it's a good one to sit on your coffee table, but it's such a strange time right now that I think there's going to be a lot of people who prefer the digital version because it's not a tangible thing to bring into their house, and that's fine. And there's certainly a digital version available, but it's the deal was Triumph is the publisher, and Larry Baldessero, who I see here, really helped give me some great advice as I was going through deciding whether or not to do this. But they pitched me in spring of 2018, April 2018, of doing a book. They have a series called The Big 50. They have another series that people may be more familiar with called 100 Things to Do, 100 Things to Know About Team X Before You Die. And I always love that they put the before you die in there. It's very threatening and it makes you really want to buy that book. But their next series after the 100 Things is 50, The Big 50. So the idea was 50 essays about sort of the men and women that tell the story of whichever team. And the timetable just wasn't right for me to do that. And then we started talking more about, well, Big 50 would really work well if we wait another year and hit the 50th anniversary of the Brewers move from Seattle to Milwaukee. And then we talked further and decided that instead of a paperback book, like that one was, a collection of essays, let's do it as a more of a keepsake, a coffee table book, and make it really let the photographs tell as much of the story as anything. So it kind of morphed from this one project to something completely different. And I still haven't got my hands on the actual book. It's coming right now, allegedly, and May 19th is the date, and that still allegedly is the date. I sort of keep waiting for world events to get in the way, so we'll see. But the Brewers getting involved meant that they threw open their archive. So we had really full reign over every photo they had. There's a little room off the press box that has file cabinets filled with, in some cases, prints, in many cases, slides of photos. And it really wasn't until deep into the Miller Park era, like 2006 maybe, that they really went digital. So a lot of the stuff before that exists in this haphazard file cabinet. So that's sort of how I spent my fall, digging around that file cabinet a little bit and coming out with photos. And one of the things that was interesting was you'd be surprised, I think, how little they kept from some of the early stuff. Some of it was lost in a fire, I guess. And in 1978, there was a fire at County Stadium that took a lot of their archive. Some of it over the years was lent and never returned. And as a result, their photo archive is not extensive. The example that comes to my mind is Tommy Harper was one of the greatest players who wore a Brewers uniform. Certainly at the beginning, it was the best player on that team. The Brewers have one photograph of Tommy Harper, and it's in the book. And it's probably one a lot of people have seen, sliding into home plate. It is a great photograph. But I think over the years, because of the fire, because it wasn't as common to keep as many. I mean, now there's thousands. There's hundreds of photos from every game that they keep because it's all digitized. But Mario Zeno, who's basically as close as the Brewers have to an official historian, over the years when he was working for the club, basically acquired a lot of the photographs that are in the book from other sources with rights to use them in perpetuity. So a lot of the book has Mario's fingerprints on it, and some of that was done when they did the Greg Hoffman's book, Closing County Stadium, and then at the 25th anniversary of the team, they did another book. So those projects helped them kind of replenish the photo archive. So anyway, that's a long way of saying it is the photo. Hopefully I get out of the way, and there's some stories in there, but the photographs are really, to me as a fan, the part that made me the most excited going through and trying to pick the right photographs to represent the great players of 50 years.
Interesting. When we did the convention up in Minnesota, we had a tour of all their historical stuff, and their person who heads that, when they moved from the outdoors from the Metropolitan Stadium into the Humphrey Dome, they lost all their storage space. So they started just throwing things in dumpsters. And he happened to go out there one time. They're throwing away contracts, like Walter Johnson's contract. They just were tossing all this stuff. Teams just didn't have the same bent on history as I think some of us do. Other questions?
I don't, maybe, and it just well, there's expense involved in keeping some of that stuff. And for especially teams like the Brewers, I mean, you all have heard stories of Bud Selig and, some every now and then a check would bounce. And I just don't think that I think there was more focus on sort of getting the team on the field and playing these games than preserving the history that was unfolding right in front of them. So that was one of the challenges was, having a representation of these great players, especially from those early years. And, I think we did a pretty good job. Like, a lot of time has passed now since we closed the book on this, so to speak. And there hasn't been any, like, I thought I might come across a name and be like, oh my God, we didn't get, Larry Sorensen in the book. Well, we got Larry Sorensen in the book. So I think, I'm sure you guys will come up with some names that we missed. And I look forward to that when we all get together again and you can tell me how we screwed this thing up.
Yeah.
Adam, this is Larry. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Larry. Anybody else hear Larry okay?
Oh, I don't hear him.
Larry's on, he's on this. Are you on a phone, Larry?
Oh, no, on a microphone.
On a microphone? Okay.
No video.
Okay. What's your question? If I have to, I can relay it to Adam.
Well, just ask Adam. I mean, this is the first April in many, many years when he hasn't been writing about baseball on a daily basis, really. So I'm just curious, what is the hardest part of the shutdown for him?
Okay.
Yeah, I got him. I heard him.
Good.
What is the hardest part of the shutdown after being at the ballpark for all these previous Aprils? We've been really busy. MLB.com, like the Journal Sentinel, like The Athletic, like SABR, we're still trying to keep fans engaged to the extent we can. Teams are trying these rebroadcasts, which I was pretty fired up about early. My interest in that is kind of waning a little bit, and the responses I get when I'm writing about some of the rebroadcasts makes me think that maybe others are losing some of the novelty. Like me, like everyone, I want some real games. But we've done our best to try to do some projects to keep people engaged. I'm doing a thing about the top 5 at each position in Brewers history. We've done, all 30 projects where you try to identify. Today we had one on trying to find the sweetest swing in Brewers history. Things that get people talking about baseball a little bit, because there's nothing we can do right now about not having any baseball to watch, but we still can sort of talk and debate about the game, which is always the best part of baseball anyways, is almost kind of the chatter about the game. So we're trying to find projects that allow for some of that. And just by the nature of some of those, it's more time intensive, frankly, than almost covering the game. You go to the game and you sort of, news will drag you along some days, or a big moment in a ball game will sort of pull you in one direction or the other. And we're sort of in this perpetual spring training where, in spring training, you show up in the morning and there's there's not a lot of news that's happening in spring training. You're generating a lot on your own. And it's of all the time of year, it's for us the biggest grind. And we're sort of, it feels like that, where you're generating stories kind of out of thin air. So it's been really busy, and I've been very happy to stay busy. I mean, again, like everyone, I would way rather be watching some baseball games. But, who knows how long we're going to be in this position. And I would rather try to keep coming up with some ideas to keep people interested than just sit back and wait for something to happen when it might be a while.
With all the rumors out there flying around, Bob, Bob, you have a question? I saw your hand move. Oh. Unmute yourself, Bob, or if I can get to you here. There you go.
Okay. We're a historical society as much as anything. Of the players that have dealt with over the years, are there any that you would say have a really good sense of baseball history and their place in it, and think about the past as they go through their careers?
Yeah, a couple come to mind, and they're both pitchers. Zach Greinke is, probably the smartest player I covered. Doesn't always express himself in a way that makes, especially the casual fans, understand that. But I think people that really followed his career understand how much he respects, the game of baseball in his own way, and just how much he knows about the game. The one who really jumps to mind is another guy I think most people wouldn't think of, but Ben Sheets knows as much about the history of baseball as any player I've ever covered. And really understood when he played. You used the phrase, their place in the game. I think Ben Sheets had an appreciation for that. And it was a shame that he played for some lousy teams, because had he played in an era, a little bit later, I think he would have been even more, sometimes I think Ben Sheets isn't like the most popular. If you listed the most popular players, I'm not sure Ben Sheets makes that list, because he tended to get hurt. And in 2008, he got hurt at the worst time, right at the end of that season, when they thought they could win the World Series. And I think that kind of hurts him. But I just feel like had he played in an era where he had a little more around him, he would be even more regarded than he is, because he was a great pitcher and he understood the history of the game and what it meant to wear a major league uniform.
Mm-hmm.
So he jumps to my mind right away as a guy who really knew a lot about the game, and you just wouldn't know it because he's such a goober. And he signed the biggest contract in franchise history, and he shows up in like cargo shorts and a camouflage T-shirt, if I remember correctly, to the press conference. So he comes off as this, like, in the book, one of the quotes was, I think it was Jeff Jenkins who said, he has these airs of like this kid from the bayou who doesn't know anything. But Jenkins said, don't let that fool you. This guy knows what he's doing, and he is as competitive a guy as you'll ever meet, and understands the history. And I'll tell you, one of my very favorite Ben Sheets memories, one of those like little things that's etched in your brain forever, was on one of the Little League games that they did, where they parade all the Little Leaguers around the running track. It takes, 45 minutes or something before a game. And Ben Sheets would go up there on the rail and high five every single kid that came by. And it was like one of those little things, but it really stood out in my mind because I haven't seen another player do that. He was definitely one of my favorites.
Thanks.
Other questions?
Sure. Hey, Adam, how are you? Thanks for doing this.
Absolutely.
I saw you talk to Woody and his playing with his wife and goofing around. What's it like talking to players right now? What kind of feel do you get for how they're doing with this?
Yeah, it's strange right now, and the Brewers are trying to navigate these appearances because they inevitably conversation goes to, well, what do you think is going to happen? And the players are not in a position to really have an answer for that. So they're all in a really tough position, not only like the uncertainty in hearing from reporters calling them up, or, Aunt Tilly wants to know what's going to happen with their season tickets. At the same time, they're having to stay in game shape to the extent that they can. And it's a really big challenge, I think, for a lot of players. For the top end guys who have these extensive home gyms, they're probably fine. But there's a lot of ball players who just aren't at that point in their career yet. And they're having to really scramble to stay fit and stay in shape. And, Brandon Woodruff he happened to build a home gym in his garage this offseason, picked a pretty good time. And his dad came over last week and built a mound. So he's got that in the backyard, and he's been playing catch with his 5 months pregnant wife. So he just took part in this virtual happy hour that the Brewers did, which was really fantastic, and something I hope they do more with Woodruff and Robin Yount and David Stearns. And, the joke was made, and maybe it's right that Woodruff's going to show up with fantastic control when he gets back because he's, playing what sounds like some pretty aggressive catch with a wife who's 5 months pregnant. So everybody's trying to figure it out, and it is, I think like everybody, nobody knows what to do, nobody knows how to act or what to think or what's next. And these guys are in a real state of limbo right now.
Is MLB communicating some of their ideas out there, or is it pretty quiet?
It's quiet. Everyone can draw their own conclusions about where the stories about the different scenarios come from, whether that's an MLB leak or whether it's, coming from the Players Association side or agents. I don't know the answer to that. I think MLB is trying to play this pretty tight to the vest right now. And again, part of that is just the uncertainty because, for baseball to be the point of playing baseball, besides making everybody a little bit of money, which probably is pretty high on the list, but a side effect of it is, it's like Bud Selig has that line that he uses all the time about baseball as a social institution. And look, he says it a lot, and I know some people kind of roll their eyes, but there is something to be said for the role that baseball could play in sort of lifting everybody up a little bit and sort of symbolic of a country coming back to life. And for that to have the effect that everybody wants it to have, other things in the country have to be in a better situation. Like baseball can't be hoarding tests for the coronavirus to keep their players safe when the community at large needs those tests and can't get them. So I think everybody agrees that step one is the community, the country needs to have its arms better around this problem before baseball can use the resources it would need to play games. That's step one. Then step two is figuring out how do you do it? What does it look like when it's back? And again, I think there is probably many different scenarios that are debated and thrown around. I don't know which one is going to win out in the end. I do know this season is not going to look anything like any other season in the history of the game. And it's going to be different. And I think Craig Counsell has done a really good job in just articulating. He's really good at saying the right thing, saying something that sticks with you. And I think one of the things that he has stressed from the beginning, even before we all left Phoenix, was, this season's going to be different, and you have to accept that and be okay with it. This is not going to be a partial season like other partial seasons. And, you kind of have to accept that it's going to be different. But if there could be some live baseball for us to watch, I think, look, we're all biased because we're baseball fans. But I think for the country, it could be a really good thing.
Yeah, I agree. You just mentioned Counsell. He somehow has a way of building chemistry or building teams. And I think it starts with the long spring training. So if they do come back with only a real short spring training, is that going to be more of a challenge for the Brewers, putting together a team of 85 new guys, or how many they have on that?
Well, again, that's going to depend on what the season looks like. Are the rosters going to be larger than usual because you don't have minor league teams to feed and you still have to account for injuries that are surely going to happen even over a shorter season? So there's a chance that it's a bigger group that's together. How the chemistry will be formed, I don't think anybody can say because nobody's ever tried to do this before. The thing that they, if you're going to be like theoretical about it, they got to ask before all this happened. There was the story of the Brewers spring training was all these new faces. It was kind of jarring for a team coming off back-to-back postseason appearances to turn over a huge proportion of its roster. I counted 15 major league acquisitions by David Stearns. That was, I think, just jarring because it was different. If you think back 81, 82, that whole team came back again, or most of it in 83, and everybody thought, okay, the disappointment of Game 7 in St. Louis wore off, and everybody thought, look, we'll come back and do it again next year. And it didn't happen. But this was a totally different scenario where some of those glue guys, Mike Moustakas and Gio Gonzalez, and some of the players that were really important to the chemistry of the team are gone. And the theory was that because they brought in so many experienced players on those short-term deals, you know, Sogard coming back, Jerko, Smoke, Lindblom coming back to the U.S., Brett Anderson. These are guys who've played a lot of baseball. They've been a part of a lot of different teams. So the theory was that, yes, it's a lot of new faces, but it's guys who've been through this before. They've come together as a group that didn't know each other, and they've made it work. So I don't know if that was going to actually come into play. I mean, it's probably your talent that makes you a good team more than some of these ideas like chemistry, but they felt like they were built to come together quickly just because of the experience that they had in the room. And as far as Council, I mean, it is kind of a fascinating story, just how each of the last 2 years going into the season, the expectations from a lot of outside voices were pretty low. You know, the experts didn't particularly like their pitching, for example. And Craig Counsell and David Stearns found a way, to make it work, to bring guys, with all their analysts crunching the numbers, to bring guys into the right situations to have success. And then it was kind of Counsell was the guy who dealt with the ethereal stuff about, for that to work, you have to get guys to buy into it. You have to have, you know, Chase Anderson and Zach Davies, and even Brandon Woodruff at times, and even Jordan Lyles when he was going good at times, buy into the idea that you can be pitching a great game and you get at 80 pitches in the fifth inning and you're out because they've got guys in the bullpen that they think can match up. If guys were upset about that or chafed by the way that he managed, they did a really good job of keeping that in-house, because I didn't hear it. I think more likely he was able to get the players to buy into this sort of strange looking version of baseball. And it was definitely to their benefit with getting to within a win of the World Series in 2018, and then getting to within a couple of outs of the division series last year.
Other questions, guys?
Yeah, I've got one for you if you got a second here, as we keep on the Craig Counsell train. Over the last few years, all the different players that you've interviewed and talked with, do you think there's another Craig Counsell in there that in, say, 5-10 years, however long that'll be, when their playing days are over, they become a manager?
We actually did this. This was one of these little all 30 stories that we did, where we tried to identify a guy from each team that would be a future manager. And I went with Brock Holt, and I don't think it was a very good pick, because I don't really know jack squat about Brock Holt yet. I think he was the guy who looks and feels the most like Craig Counsell, because he plays all over and his teammates love him, and he's like a glue guy and he's a gritty guy, that he just came to my mind and I put him in there. I wish I had said Manny Pena. I think Manny Pena has a chance to be a good manager. He almost walked away from baseball. He was in the minor leagues and was sent back to AA in the Royals system, and he was going to walk away from the game of baseball. And it was actually his wife who encouraged him to, just give it another year. Don't walk away from this just yet. And, an experience like that, I think, changes your outlook on the game, especially since he's had a lot of success since then. I think that was David Stearns' first trade. It was K-Rod to the Tigers for an infield prospect who didn't pan out, and a player to be named who ended up being Manny Pena. And I think he would be a good manager someday. He really knows the game. He's experienced certainly the lows, the grind of the game of baseball. He's bilingual, which is always a good thing for a manager. And I think he would be a good one. But it's not as obvious as Counsell. I mean, when Counsell played, you knew that guy was going to be a manager someday. I mean, I've always said of Counsell, he's the kind of person, if he wanted to run for mayor, I think he could win. He is just, and not just because he's popular, I think he seems capable at adapting to the role that he plays. And you think about his career, I mean, he played for kind of some old school type teams. The Diamondbacks team, that was not a that was not the kind of a team like the Ivy League GMs build today. I mean, that was Kurt Schilling and Randy Johnson and Mark Grace and Craig Counsell and Louis Gonzalez. And even that Marlins team that they cobbled together to win the 97 series, that was not necessarily a sabermetrically inclined team, as I remember. So Counsell has adapted to this new brand of baseball. And, think about going from Doug Melvin as your GM to David Stearns. That's about as different of personalities and outlooks on what it means to construct a roster as you can get. And Counsell has made it work. So I give him credit for being pretty good adapter to the way that the game has changed.
We're at 7:53. We could probably run a couple of minutes over. Anybody, one or two last questions for Adam? You got time yet, Adam?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I still have some beer left, so that's the key.
Okay. Cool.
Well, I like that Tom O'Connell is on the call. One of my favorite agents is Tom O'Connell. He has Wade Miley, and he's, speaking of drinking beer, he's very fun to run into at the winter meetings because he'll buy you a beer.
Looking at the people on here, there are a few people that have not been able to attend our Saturday meetings for a while. Tom's one of them. We've got a couple of people from out of state. Bob Russins from Oregon, Francis out here from North Carolina, South Carolina. Sorry, I always get these two wrong, Francis. But so we've got people, Matt, who's not been able to make the meetings. So this is good. This is, is this a silver lining in this? That it gives us an opportunity to do a meeting in a different way and have a different type of participation. So.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'm a longtime member of this chapter, but this is obviously my first meeting. It's a long commute from Oregon to come there. And I'm the only Milwaukee Brewer fan in the Northwest SABR chapter. So it's good to swim in this pool here with other Brewer fans because it's lonely out here. Although I have a seat from County Stadium in my home here in Beaverton, Oregon. So that's nice.
You got to get Richie Sexton involved. He's up in Washington.
Yeah.
Still a big Brewers fan.
Yeah.
I'm really glad to be able to join you. Of course, I know several of you from SABR national meetings, but the same holds here in North Carolina. It is North Carolina, Dennis.
Thank you.
I'm really happy to have the opportunity to use this. I'm sorry the situation in the country's as it is, but I am glad to be able to join you with this technology.
Well, I could actually see this technology going forward, even if we can get together again. It's a way to do other meetings and different opportunities to talk to speakers. So the first speaker we do virtually is in our back door here, close by, but we could get speakers from all over. I wrote down your comments about Ben Sheets could be an interesting conversation. If he's got the historical background, to get a ball player who's historically sound would be a very interesting. So
I would join that meeting just to watch Ben Sheets fight with the technology.
Well, maybe that's another challenge, but yeah. Yeah. Anything else, anybody?
Yeah, Dennis,
yeah.
Matt here. I do have something for you, Adam. Not so much a question, but a comment. I think this is going to sound like a backhanded compliment, but it's really not. I think, when you kind of centralize the journalism under the league, and you could easily run into like not having real journalism. And I think that's exactly the opposite of what MLB.com has. I think I really enjoy all the takes, and you're not shills for the owners. You're not shills for the players. You give it to us for real. And I really appreciate that. And I say thank you for that.
I really appreciate you saying that. That's it's a fine line to walk sometimes, and it's just kind of the nature of the job that I have compared to the nature of the guys who write for the Journal Sentinel and other publications. It's different, and it's just kind of like this season ahead. It's going to be different, and you just have to embrace it for what it is. And in my job, there's certainly times where it's frustrating, where you want to write and say more and you run into some walls. But I would say overwhelmingly, MLB.com has always let me write what I want, write what it is. And I've tried to do that as well as I could. I really appreciate you saying that.
Before we cut off here, there's a couple of things I wanted to also mention. If you know anybody who has thought of joining SABR or should join SABR, this may be a very good time to do so as part of the hashtag Stay at Home with SABR initiative, that all the new SABR memberships, half of the membership is going to be split with Heart to Heart International, which is a nonprofit that distributes urgently needed equipment and medication to partners around the world during this global crisis. So if you know someone who's been thinking about joining SABR, this would be a good opportunity for them to A, join SABR, and B, help out. So that's something to keep in mind if you know anybody out there who should become a member. Adam, if the season gets started, where are you hoping they go to first? Oh, they're probably not going to travel like we'd like, but
yeah, look, I mean, that's selfishly one of my biggest questions is, let's say, the Arizona plan seems like the consensus maybe leader right now as things look and as we think things are going to look. Let's say they just theoretically, they play games in those Arizona ballparks and they have each team sort of in a hotel. And that would be, that's a significant list of people when you start to think about what it takes. Players, coaches, trainers, clubbies, the umpires would have to be somewhere. And they would try to, TV people, because the whole point of this would be to broadcast the thing. They would try to keep the circle theoretically as small as possible. And that's one of the things I would be very interested to see is, where do the beat writers fit into that? Can they do this with just television broadcasts? Maybe not even radio broadcasts, do simulcast if you really want to keep it as small as possible. The trade-off would be that there's baseball and I would be covering it like this and doing potentially post-game interviews like this. I don't know that that's how it's going to look. It's just my sort of having the time during the day to stare at the walls and think about what it might look like if they do get games going again. So I would just simply say that I am hoping to go where the games are, because I would selfishly believe that there's value in having us there to cover these games live. And, I think it could be done in a safe way, in a smart way. And so that's my simple request, is just to be there to see the thing happen in person and to do my best to try to tell the story of what it looked like, because it would be a historic story. And, this is a game with a lot of years in its past, and nothing's ever happened quite like this. So to be able to be there documenting it would be a pretty interesting, unforgettable experience.
Yeah. Do you think
Dennis, do you have time for one more quick question?
Yeah.
Adam, do we got time?
Yeah.
Adam, I just wondered the financial end of this. If they did the Arizona plan, it would all be built, would it not, around television revenue? Because if there were no fans, no concessions, I've wondered about that. I don't know, maybe I just can't figure it out, but I can't figure out where the money comes from.
Yeah, the money would come from broadcasting. Yeah, it would be a made for TV event. Look, I would think the broadcasters would do rather well in that scenario, because there's a lot of people who potentially would still be, somewhat, in place, I guess is the way to put it, like we are now, and looking for some entertainment in the evenings. And baseball could provide some of that live entertainment. So it would be very much a television event. And I have a feeling that, look, I don't sell the ads, so maybe I'm being naive about it, but I think that there's the potential there for that to be rather successful. Now, it wouldn't be a regular season. It wouldn't be as successful as other years, but it would be a way to do something that maybe is good for people, good for the country, And certainly, we're not being too naive to think it wouldn't be also better for the owner's bottom line than not having games at all.
With the heat in Arizona, how do you feel about making some of the rule changes that have been discussed? 7-inning ball games because of the heat. The extra inning, putting a person on second base. Some of the, clock on pitching, which David Smith with SABR, who says will not do any good. But, some rule changes that really play the game. It's an experimental year anyhow. It'd be a good opportunity to try things.
I sort of would tend to agree. And again, I think it would go back to the Craig Counsell advice is don't expect this season to look like the baseball that we all know and love. It's just going to be something a little bit different. And again, I can't tell you which of those ideas are going to be the ones that are implemented, but I think there is the possibility that it just looks a little different this year. And none of us right now can say what that's going to be. But certainly the heat in Arizona is one issue, unless you're one of the playing at Chase Field on that day, that one of the issues that would be something to think about.
Yeah. Any last questions? We're just past our hour time here.
Yeah, I'll throw one more if I can.
Go ahead.
You mentioned earlier about the pictures kind of being lost or destroyed. And it's kind of interesting as papers and historical records these days, they seem to be getting a whole lot thinner. So you said you've been with the Brewers 20 years. How much and how public is the archive on stuff from 2008 and 2003 and stuff like that? And just for history's sake. So figure another 20, 25 years when we're, not, thinking about the games that year, but hey, we want to go look back at 2020 or farther back than that. How much of MLB is saved, and, how do you get access to all that?
Well, that's actually a really interesting question because it's not public. It's the Brewers Archive is a private archive, and I typically, they will charge for use of photos. I don't know how it's worked for the books SABR has put out or the great, the online, the bio project, but it's typically they will charge for those photos, which is why the nice thing about this project is it's the Brewers partner, the Brewers are in partnership with this. So that was the trade-off, is that they open their archive and they get a cut of the sales of the book. But it would be nice to have more of a public archive. Look, in researching the book, I started at the public library, and I know Bob, and I don't know if Rick was involved in this, but Bob, you have that folder from 1969, 1970, with news clippings from the Brewers and the Seattle Pilots saga. And that was hugely helpful to me as I started this. So some of it is kind of at the public library, but unfortunately, the Brewers Archive right now is private. I know they're working to digitize that, and whether or not that's something, maybe that's an idea maybe for the future to try to have a little bit more public-facing, stuff from their archive.
What about all your stuff that you wrote that went online back then as well?
Yeah, this one breaks my heart because, I've done all digital. It should all be there. They say everything on the internet is there forever. But unfortunately, as MLB.com has changed over the years, and we've changed our publishing systems and our archiving systems, a lot of my stuff is just sadly gone. And, 08, all that run, the CC Sabathia stuff, even 2011, the playoffs, a lot of those archives were not saved by MLB.com. And it's something every time we have a meeting, I bring up and I say, why do we not pay more attention to our archives? Because we are in a position to have the history of the game at everyone's fingertips. And I'm going to keep fighting that fight until somebody in our IT department or somebody gets in there that is interested in this, because all of that stuff has got to be somewhere. I have a hard time believing it's gone forever. But a lot of it, if I was writing the book and trying to do research, I had to kind of dig into my own files and all the little text files that I have saved from over the years to find all that material, because it's just if you're looking for it on the internet, it's very hard to find. And I'm not talking about 2001. I'm talking about, 2013, which seems like it should be better archived. So I'm going to keep fighting that fight.
Well, please do, because as baseball researchers here in Milwaukee, we've been fortunate for years that the Journal, Sentinel, and Sentinel were all on Google News. And they went off for a while, came back, and they're off again. And with libraries closed, any of our research is basically shut down. And the Journal Sentinel is our main source for going, how far back do you want to go? I miss it every day.
Yep, and same. I've found that even this winter in all these sort of historical type projects that we've done, I've missed the Google Newspaper Archive. In writing the book, it was there for me, which was super helpful. It's sad that it's gone. I don't know. We shouldn't have the excuse anymore that we didn't think to save these things, because now we're all thinking about saving and archiving, and the fact that everything is digital should make this easier. And it's interesting to run into situations where that's not the case. It's still really hard to find some of this material from the past.
Well, Adam, thank you. I hope we can ask you back again. This has been fabulous. I really appreciate this. I want to unmute everybody. Everybody, let's give Adam a big round of applause and just thank you, Adam. It's
Thank you, Adam.
Yeah.
Thank you, guys. It was really fun. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah. I'm going to mute you all again.
I'll do this down before I go.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. The book's out in May. We'll all watch for it. So thank you very much. Okay.
Thanks, Adam.
Okay.
Yep.
You guys.
Thanks, guys.
Real quick before out of here, guys, if you have comments about this, send an email to me, ideas, anything to make. I think we could use these meetings for all kinds of things. And I appreciate any ideas and help you have to make it work for us. So, okay. Everybody, over and out.
Thanks
Thank
for
you very
hosting.
much.
Nice job, Dennis. Very
Thanks,
good.
guys. Take care.
Where's my button?